The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising by Jayden Dirk. Between 1939 and 1945, war swept across the world in such a way that it never had before. The Second World War was the largest and deadliest war so far in human history. The Allies, consisting of the Soviet Union, Britain, and the United States, among others, fought against the Axis, consisting of Nazi Germany, Italy, Japan, and others. One of the reasons that World War II had such a large death count was because of Adolf Hitler's attempt to purify the German race. This purification was done through what is now known as the Holocaust. Jews, along with other minorities and thought to be lesser races, were prosecuted and exterminated through the use of ghettos, concentration camps, and extermination camps across Nazi-controlled territory. One way of controlling and imprisoning the Jews was through the use of ghettos, areas where Jews were forced to live in densely packed and poor conditions. Food, water, and medicine were controlled and limited by the Nazi officers in charge of the ghetto. The largest of these ghettos was the Warsaw Ghetto in Warsaw, Poland. About 300,000 to 400,000 Jews lived within the Warsaw Ghetto. This was roughly 30% of the population of Warsaw. However, only about 2.5% of the area of Warsaw was part of the ghetto. The population of the ghetto suffered from immense amounts of sickness and starvation. From July to September of 1942, mass deportations of the ghetto were called for. During this 3-month stretch, around 254,000 to 300,000 people were taken from the Warsaw Ghetto to the Treblinka extermination camp. At the time of the initial deportations, the Jewish resistance movement met, but decided to not resist. They believed that the deportees were being taken to labor camps. However, by the end of 1942, they learned that they were being taken to an extermination camp. During January of 1943, the Nazis in charge of the ghetto began the second phase of deportations and liquidation. The Jewish resistance within the ghetto, consisting of the Jewish Combat Organization, or the ZOB, and the Jewish Military Union, or the ZZW, resisted the deportation to the Treblinka extermination camps. There were large losses on both the Nazi side and the Jewish side, and the deportation process was halted. After the initial rebellion, the ZOB and the ZZW took control of the area in the ghetto, leading exterminations of German officials and Jewish officers within the ghetto, and building armaments to prepare for the inevitable fight. On April 19th of 1943, Nazi officials and Jewish police entered the ghetto with plans to finish the liquidation of it. By this time, the Jewish resistance was ready to fight for their unlikely but desperate freedom. The Nazi enforcers met with shocking but relatively weak resistance. The ZOB had 220 men with 3 rifles in each area of the ghetto, 2 landmines, 1 submachine gun for the entire ghetto, little ammunition, and homemade weapons which were both dysfunctional and unreliable. On the depressing and hopeless other hand, the Nazi enforcers had 2,090 men, armored vehicles, 82 machine guns, and 135 submachine guns, along with further reinforcements from other smaller ghettos. However, the Jewish resistance did have assistance from the Polish resistance movement, but it is uncertain on how much the assistance actually helped. During the afternoon of April 19th, 2 boys climbed on top of a roof along Marinowski Square, where the longest-lasting defensive position for the Jews was held. While the fighting was happening below, they hoisted up 2 flags, the Polish flag and the flag of the ZZW. The flags were symbolic for the fighters because it was seen as a rallying call on the unification of the Jews within the ghetto. The Nazi enforcers noticed this and brought down the flags as soon as they could. Despite the brute force of firearms that were used, it was the burning of the ghetto that really defeated the Jewish resistance movement. The Nazis within the ghetto systematically burned down buildings with flamethrowers and Molotov cocktails. After the initial fighting, which lasted for a few days, survivors were forced to hide in sewers in the ruins of smoldering buildings. Shootouts and grenade explosions were common as outbursts of fighting continued. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising officially ended with the destruction of the Great Synagogue of Warsaw on May 16th. Although weak and virtually destroyed, fighting continued until the last shootout on June 15th. Over the course of the entire uprising, a total of about 13,000 Jews were killed, 6,000 of that due to smoke inhalation in the fires. Most of the survivors were captured over the course of the uprising and deported to labor and extermination camps, particularly Treblinka. The Nazi casualties were much less drastic, with 16 Nazis killed and 85 injuries. However, there are liberal estimates that put the total Nazi deaths at about 300, which is still minuscule compared to the mass number of deaths during the uprising. The ruins of the ghetto were turned into the Warsaw concentration camp complex, with estimates of 220,000 Jews exterminated within the camp. A monument now stands in Warsaw, Poland, to remember and honor the Jewish resistance during the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. The uprising was not perfect, nor truly a political revolution. It was a desperate effort of survival and the need within all living things to survive.